Hello everyone, so the tuning patch is now live with all the warrior changes, and I've got some more information now, some more builds to talk through and some more numbers to back everything up. So let's get straight into it. So firstly, before I go into the builds and numbers, Blizzard did change executes, the buff that was going to be applied to execute from 10% to 7%, but interestingly only to Fury. So Fury's execute damage is only buffed by 7% instead of the promised 10%. Why? Don't know. Doesn't really matter because execute just doesn't really do that much damage for Fury anyway. So Arm still gets its 10%, Fury and Prot still gets its 10%. Also, interestingly, for the first 2 hours or so of the patch being live on NA, Mortal Strike's buff was 30% instead of the expected 15%. So some arms warriors had extra fun for 2 hours. Anyway, the builds. So the first most interesting build for me for arms in M+ is probably going to be this one. Well, you might have watched my video from beta. I didn't enjoy Colossus arms. I probably still won't, but this build seems tolerable to me at least. At least it doesn't have skull splitters, so it's got that going for it. Anyway, the single target with this build is decent. Surprisingly decent, and the AoE is really, really good. And Colossus gained a lot from these buffs, right? Because cleave damage has been increased by 20%, and Colossus has a lot of cleave modifiers. So if I search for cleave in this bar here, you'll see all these things that light up. All these talents increase or interact with cleave in some way. So that's huge for Colossus. So the numbers behind that are here. So this is a single target sim, 5 minutes. That's a respectable amount of damage from a quite AoE focused build, honestly. And this is the 5 target damage. 5 targets, really good actually. It only gets better on more targets too. Right, Slayer would look like this. So this is a more standard Slayer build. Right, and that build has actually less single target than the Colossus build that I showed, but it does have the same AoE, so I don't know. I'm going to try both, see which one I like more. And another interesting one is really a heavy single target build for Slayer. So this one has Blunt Instruments and Juggernaut. It doesn't have Bloodborne, it doesn't have... Yeah, I think it's Bloodborne, and it doesn't have death experience. Yeah, that's the main difference here, really. So this one seems really high on single target. So if you really need good single target, then maybe this is the one for you. I'm gonna try this, see how it plays. Just like the other 2 builds, I'm gonna be streaming, well, all evening tomorrow to try all these builds. So hopefully I get time to try them all. And also interesting information is probably the difference between Blunt Instruments and Warbreaker on single target. So with this build, if I just change that 1 talent point, that's the single target difference. Pretty big, 13.2%. But if I change to Warbreaker for 5 targets, I think I seemed about 6% increase for Warbreaker. So it depends where you want your damage, I guess. If you want to be the single target machine, or if you want to be able to do a little bit of both, it's up to you. But if you do go with Blunt Instruments, then your AoE isn't really that bad. It's just not as good as Warbreaker. And it's maybe not as smooth either, because then you feel like you have to sweep your Colossus Smash, and Warbreaker doesn't have that issue. Anyway, moving on. So the Blunt Instruments build on 5 targets is doing a respectable nearly 3.7 million on 5 targets. So not bad. Not bad at all. So I've also got some screenshots. Thank you, Garm, for this one. Let me find them. Here we are. So this is an overall he did in a +10 stone vault with the Colossus build that I showed here. And the breakdown that he had in his Arakara 10 looked like this. So Cleave hits really hard. Demolish hits hard. And Mortal Strike is doing decent amount of damage as well. The rest of your stuff doesn't do as much, but Overpower obviously buffs Mortal Strike and Cleave. Roar is Roar. And yeah, nice. So moving on to Fury. So Fury hasn't really changed all that much, although Fury's Bloodthirst and Rampage damage is high now, which means that Anger Management builds are probably benefiting slightly more from those buffs than the Reckless Abandon ones do. Anyway, Let me find the numbers for them. So firstly, we got Reckless Abandon Thane, which is this build here. So this is the standard Thane build that that most websites will be recommending, which I think is a good build. Very easy to play. It has Titanic Rage and Odin's Fury as well, so you get some decent upfront burst, and it's very easy to set up your damage as well. So the numbers for that build is this. So that does a respectable amount of single targets, with my gear at least. Do keep in mind actually that the gear that I showed for arms probably isn't very optimal, because most of my gear is built around Fury. So perhaps if you have better gear for arms, you would do you would have a higher number on arms than I do. Anyway, so that's the standard Thane build on single target, and on AoE it is higher than arms on 5 targets, but arms is obviously able to do more uncapped damage than Fury is, because Fury's bread and butter is the meat cleaver 5 target cleave, right? So nothing new here, but just to get a baseline. Okay, so next up is the anger management version of the Thane build that I've been playing. So this one has Roar and anger management. It doesn't have Odin's Fury. And I've quite enjoyed playing this build. It does have slightly more single target than the Reckless Abandon build theoretically, but obviously it's punished more by downtime. What I do like about this build is that it has cooldowns more often, so you can walk into the next pack with cooldowns more often than the Reckless Abandon build does. But the Reckless Abandon build obviously has more burst. It does have Odin's Fury. So yeah. Anyway, the AoE damage of the anger management build without Odin's is similar to the standard one. Slightly behind, but then again it's slightly ahead on single target. So maybe it depends on what you feel like playing, or maybe it depends on if you want a little bit more single target. Anyway, moving on is the standard Slayer build, which is this one. So this is quite standard. We have seen this one before. This one we've been playing since the beginning of War Within pretty much. And this one does, well, slightly more single target than the Thane builds, because Slayer is just slightly better at that. But it is worse at AoE. So this is the AoE sims that I'm doing are just 5 targets, by the way. So yeah, that's it really. So I'm going to try all of these builds, like I said, in my stream tomorrow and throughout the week, most likely. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video to tell you what I think is best, what builds I prefer. But yeah, that's what I've got for now. So hopefully you find this video helpful and interesting. I don't know where we're going to end up when it comes to like comparing to other classes in M+, but I don't think we're going to be meta, no, if that's what you're wondering. I do think we'll be a solid pick though, and I'm not unhappy with these nerfs whatsoever. So let's see where we end up, and I'll see you next time.